Today I'm going to talk about Kimi K 1.5 from Moonshot AI. It's a new reasoning model that came out about 3.5 weeks ago. It's caused quite a bit of stir in the community and gotten a lot of attention. Before I talk about Kimi K 1.5, I want to talk a little bit about Moonshot AI's history. Moonshot AI is a Chinese company that was founded in March of 2023. In October of that same year, they launched their first LLM, Kimi. And in February of 2024, Alibaba, one of their competitors, a Chinese competitor that's behind the Quinn line of LLMs, if you weren't aware of that relationship, they led a $1 billion funding round for Moonshot AI. So the business and politics behind that, I'm not quite sure of, but two competitors linked up, and even ironically enough, some of the benchmarks that we look at, they use Quinn to show how they exceed Quinn with this new model, Kimi K 1.5. So as I said, about 3.5 weeks ago on January 20th of this year, Kimi K 1.5 became available to the public. The next day, the research paper detailing its architecture and its training was released on archives. Three things that stick out to me is that it's free to use, the architecture, and the fact that it's multimodal. It has vision. A lot of the reasoning models that have recently made a splash, OpenAI's O3 Mini, DeepSeek's R1, do not have vision capabilities. O1 does have vision capabilities, but Moonshot AI is claiming, and the benchmarks largely back it up, that it matches or exceeds the performance of O1. And in math, code, and reasoning, especially. A couple downsides. The first thing to note for me, I'm here on Moonshot AI's GitHub. There's not a lot on the GitHub. This cookbook, worth taking a look at if you're a developer. If we go to the page for Kimi K 1.5, all you have is the PDF of the research article that was published on Archive that I spoke of, and this README here. It's not open source. It's free to use in the GUI, and they did have, you could request an API key when it first came out. All of that information was here on the GitHub. It has since disappeared. I'm not sure if the API keys that they issued function or if they completely shut that down. I have a feeling that this was related to scaling. It got a lot of attention. It's still getting a lot of attention. They probably couldn't support the volume of API calls that they were getting, and they either temporarily or permanently shut down the API. Maybe we'll see it come back on a free tier or a freemium. Maybe we'll see it come back on some sort of a paid tier. We'll talk more about that later. I was talking about the benchmarks. This is rather small for you. You can go to their GitHub and look at this same image. But if you look at the benchmarks for Kimi K 1.5, they compare it to OpenAI's O1, O1 Mini, and one of Quinn's reasoning models that recently came out. They also compare it in short chain of thought to some of the standard models like 4035 Sonnet. We'll focus here on the long chain of thought, the reasoning model benchmarks. Of course, they're probably going to publish the benchmarks they excelled in, not put in many where they didn't exceed the top state-of-the-art benchmarks for the current models available. But as I said before, this is a math benchmark. They exceeded in math, even O1. It's math as well. This benchmark, the Math 500, they matched O1 and exceeded O1 Mini and the Quinn and the code forces. They fell behind a little bit on O1 but exceeded the others. In this other coding benchmark, they exceeded in this math. This general benchmark, they fell a little bit short of O1. But again, as I've spoken of before, these benchmarks, Don't give them a lot of weight when it's a point or two or a couple of points. And of course, they're going to publish the benchmarks that they excelled in. But the bottom line, they have done very well in math, in reasoning in general. Definitely a model to take a look at. It's a shame the API isn't available. But another thing to point out about the benchmarks that they didn't publish, but you can easily see, if you look at DeepSeek's R1 and some of the benchmarks, this math benchmark, this code benchmark, other math benchmark here, and then some of the general reasoning and knowledge benchmarks, DeepSeek's R1 still exceeds them by a little bit, depending on which benchmark you look at, which is probably why they didn't publish that. On the other hand, like I said, they do handle vision. The latency is very low on it, so the time to first token, the tokens per second, it's really fast. So you've got to take all that into consideration. At the end of the day, it's a really good model. You can go you can actually sign up. You have to use a phone number. So just to point that out, I have seen an uptick in spam calls, both with this Kimi K 1.5 and Kimi's platform in general, and a lot of other platforms I've used when they've required a phone number. Got a simple but effective GUI setup. Here is the normal model, the Kimi approved version since it came out in October of 2023. But this is their general model. This is that reasoning model. They call it long thinking. I like the 2 O's that they include. You have to select that. You can attach up to 50 files, various types. Again, it does have vision capabilities as well. And it handles even a large amount of files well during its reasoning. You can set up common phrases where you save common prompts or common phrases that begin prompts. Said not a real complex GUI, but it's effective. Just remember to go here and select the long thinking if you want the reasoning. And remember, this is not available open source. All of this data is going to Moonshot AI. I have a good feeling they're kind of vague about what they do with their data, that they're using this data to train on. So if it's sensitive data, definitely think twice. If it's data that's a company secret, definitely think twice before using it here in the GUI. We'll see what they offer in the future. Maybe something open source, maybe a paid tier for their API. But any which way, I think what we're looking at is probably the imminent release of something else in the near future, maybe in the next weeks, the next few months. This is simply a stepping stone for them. The API reached a scaling threshold where they pulled it back, maybe for some other motive. But again, I would encourage you to go in, check it out. Definitely keep an eye on Moonshot AI in general. To talk about then the other things that I spoke of, their architecture. The architecture, in their case, they use a lot of reinforcement learning. I remember about 1.5, 2 years ago, Andrew Ang spoke of how, and he had a graphic of how generative AI would be the large portion of AI that we would see in use. And reinforcement learning was a very small circle off in the side. Reinforcement learning has been used for years, gaming, with chess, with Go. It's been used, reinforcement learning with human feedback, things like OpenAI and how they came up with GPT-3, which made its big splash at the end of November 2022. But now we're seeing with these reasoning models, reinforcement learning has become key to how they have trained these reasoning models, and especially these Chinese reasoning models such as Kimi K 1.5, DeepSeek's R1 have really utilized reinforcement learning to bring their models to the next level. they talk about scaling reinforcement learning unlocks a new axis for the continued improvement of artificial intelligence. That came straight from their paper that was published on Archive. And they kept the architecture simple. No Monte Carlo tree search like in classic reinforcement learning. None of the real computational intense methods that we see in classic reinforcement learning. They kept it simple. They increased the context window to 128,000 tokens, which allowed the model to have more context as it reasoned and to save that context. And they really improved on their policy and their policy optimization. In short, things like search-based reasoning, where they get multiple responses and then reason on those multiple responses, and other changes. If you want to know more, go to their paper, read more about it, go online to reputable sources and read more about it. But again, like we saw with DeepSeek's R1, they not only really optimized their use of hardware because of the limits on hardware and AI chips that China has been able to receive after the foreign sanctions that were put on them several years ago to limit the number of AI chips in the name of national security. If or if not, that's really a concern. But they've really optimized the architecture here. DeepSeek R1 actually has a very complicated architecture that introduced a lot of new, very effective features, but here they kept it really simple and they got really good results. They say they're going to have an application, a mobile and desktop application. It seems it's already available for desktop. When I have to look, I have the desktop version here that you can download. For the Mac, they've got a browser extension. I haven't found an application on the Google Play Store or any of Apple's products yet, but I would guess that is coming. As I've said, with the API, we'll have to see. So for development, it's pretty limited right now, but in the least, I'd keep my eye on this company. With Kimi K 1.5, they've really balanced efficiency with depth. They're able to meet the benchmarks and the performance in the wild of some of the other very recent, very successful, very popular reasoning models. And they also have done it with a lot of efficiency in terms of their architecture, in terms of their latency, in terms of the hardware that they need to use. Again, I think that this is probably leading to a freemium model for the reasoning or a paid API. We'll have to see the details. I'd go check it out myself. For me, I don't worry about having to put the phone number in as opposed to an email. You can see here, it's right here, all the login is based on a phone number. You don't have to put in an email, any personal details. The trade-off of that is I can't prove it. It doesn't really matter to me. I had an uptick in spam calls for a few days, but to me it's worth it to be able to go out, play with these new models, see what's coming out. Again, Moonshot AI, really exciting company, has done a lot in a short time space. I'm looking forward to what comes out next with them, what they're able to do at a fraction of the cost, in a fraction of the time, both in latency and in the time that they've existed. What's next from them? That's all I have for you today. Stay tuned for the next video. Until the next time.